Hi, my name's Anouska de Georgiou, and welcome to the Empowered Exchange podcast. Today, my guest on the Empowered Exchange podcast is Andrea Leeb. She's a survivor, she's an advocate, and she's an author of this book, Such a Pretty Picture. Andrea, thank you so much for being here.
And thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, I'm so delighted that I get to meet you in person because we've spoken a few times and we've, come across each other's paths. And I always feel like with this podcast, and since my journeys began with coming out as a survivor publicly, all the people that I was meant to connect with have somehow come into my path. And that you're a great example of that, of how we came together through mutual connections.
Right.
And, I'm just so excited that your book's coming out next week. And by the time people who are watching this see it, they'll be able to get the book, and they can get it on Amazon, on what other platforms?
Barnes and Noble, Simon & Schuster platform, and on Bookshop, and also at your local bookstore. You can ask for it and they'll order it if they don't have it.
Great, that is such a good point. I never really think about that, but I suppose you can ask for it, and it also helps to get the book into different bookstores. It's your story. It's an autobiographical story. And can you just give us a quick overview of what the book talks about?
Yeah, so I am an incest survivor. And the story talks about my father was the person who molested me. And it talks about my story as a little girl. It started when I was 4.5, and actually my mother walked in and caught him, and she went hysterically blind, actually physically blind for a month. And then I unwilling to see for decades. So it's about my survival coming through this abuse, learning for a long time I hid it from everyone. I mean, I was told it had to be a secret by my father. And for a long time I hid it. As I grew up, I did well academically, went to school, and I kept telling myself, well, as long as you're smart enough, pretty enough, perfect enough, you can pretend this abuse away. Right. But as we know, that's not possible, and secrets catch up with us.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being willing to tell the story, for being willing to write it, because I do think, as a survivor myself, it's only through speaking out that it gives other people permission and the safety and numbers of speaking out to do the same and have permission to come forward if that's the right choice for them. One of the things that I've talked about a lot for my own story is recognizing what an individual choice that is, and that it's important to respect each survivor's willingness to come forward or stay private about this. But I really thank you and commend you for the work you do, and I know that you're an advocate also. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because for a long time, I was 33 when I finally got help for this. But for many, many years after, really decades, I told my therapist, of course, I'm a big proponent of therapy. I told my friends. When I met my husband, I told him. But I didn't make this public. And really, it was the Me Too movement, the confluence of two things, my father's death and the Me Too movement, and reading other people's stories and seeing how one survivor was empowering another. I thought, well, maybe if I share this story, I can empower another incest survivor or child sexual abuse survivor to tell theirs, not necessarily to write a book, but to get the help that they need.
Right, right. I mean, for many people, many survivors that I've met, one of the things that stops them coming forward is that perhaps they might not be believed, or even if they are believed, they'll simultaneously be attacked for whatever society regards as their part or their, participation in that abuse. Was that something that was true for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for years I didn't want to tell people because I was afraid I wouldn't be believed. I also was, this was my family. It was my mother, my father. I have a sister. And I was, for a long time, very afraid of the attacks on my family or the choices that I made. I kept my mother in my life, and by default, my father. So I really didn't want to be public. I was also a lawyer, and I didn't want people I worked with to know this about me. Even with the therapy, I think there was still deep inside of me a little kernel of shame. And also I was also afraid that people would say, well, why didn't you prosecute your father?
Yeah.
So it definitely took me a long time. Now, writing this book, I struggled with it a little, but a lot less. I was ready to tell this story. I did go back into therapy so I could have somebody to speak to as I wrote the book. But it became easier. The more drafts I wrote, it took me 5 years to write the book. So the more drafts I wrote, the more comfortable I became writing it.
If people who are watching perhaps are survivors and haven't come forward publicly yet or at all within their situation, do you have any recommendations for them in terms of if they want to try to do that, how to do that, if they wanted to write a book, how to do that?
Well, let's start with coming. If you've been holding this secret inside of yourself and haven't been telling anybody, I think the first step is to start the process to getting help. And there are a lot of hotlines here in LA where we are. The UCLA Rape Treatment Center has a 24-hour hotline. Nationally, the RAIN, which is the Rape and Incest National Network, has a hotline that can connect you to local resources. I think that's the first step. Writing a book, that becomes a whole nother journey, and I think it's great if people want to. I think that I would recommend that you be solid with your healing is not linear. We all know that, but you be in a place where you feel relatively healed and that you have a really good support system.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, getting a good therapist and perhaps these hotlines and things are able to connect you with
The right-
therapy in your area. And as you said, in LA, we've got quite a lot of resources. I know the Rape Foundation too offers resources, and you can actually get through many nonprofits free therapy for a year. I think at least a
Yeah,
year.
UCLA Rape I'm on the advisory board at UCLA Rape Treatment Center, and they do offer up to a year of therapy. They also, for children who are, if you're a parent and you are aware that your child has been sexually abused, they offer services for both the child and the parent to, the non-perpetrating parent, of course, to go through
That's
treatment.
amazing. And I can see how relevant that is to many parents who maybe the non-perpetrating parent is fearful about coming forward for fear that they'll be perhaps they don't understand whether they might be prosecuted for knowing and not saying something, or and that might hold people back, I would say. So that's really good information to have.
Yeah, no, it's we are fortunate, but we're not the only place. There are other places for anybody listening nationally, and I encourage you to look at the national resources. My biggest message to other survivors is that healing is possible. If I can heal, then I think most people can. The abuse I went on for 10 years, and it was constant. But if I can heal, I believe everyone can heal, but I think you have to tell that story and get help. And keeping it inside is only going to eat at you. I was close to suicide when I finally made the decision to tell someone.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And for my own story too, I kept it hidden and I was in denial. And I even tried to convince myself that it wasn't true because what I wanted was for it not to be true. So I kept that narrative going as long as my own psyche would allow me to do that, until finally there was a point where it was showing in my body. It was showing, I was drinking alcoholically, and it was just showing in my health, and I was having less space between those little nervous breakdowns, that I tried to then conceal, right?
I also had little breakdowns. I once went, when I was in college, I wanted to jump off Key Bridge. Luckily, I was with friends and they were there, and they stopped me from going any further. And as a teenager, I write, and this is true in my life. As a teenager, my body looked like a little road map of cuts. Yeah, even at the age of 10, I was sticking myself with the heads of pins every day just so I could release some of that pain.
Yeah. I think self-harming is also a coping mechanism, not the healthiest, but for some people, it's one of those ones that does get you through.
It was a survival strategy.
Yes, as was my alcoholism, as was my own self-harming. But I think self-harming also has a stigma around it.
Right.
And there's a lack of understanding, as there is with sexual abuse, of why would you do that to yourself?
Right.
Right. And I think that's really a stigma that needs to be shattered, and to help people understand that just because, and we were talking about this earlier, even the thing with consent, of just because you didn't say no to something doesn't mean you consented.
Right.
So many things you can participate in as a coping mechanism. And sometimes you participate in abuse as a coping mechanism to keep yourself safe.
No, I think that's true. I didn't know I didn't know where safety ended and danger began as a young woman and as a teenager. And I also, I was so young, and I think for survivors of childhood sexual abuse particularly, my agency was robbed before it even became a thing. I never had any agency. So when boys would start to kiss me or to use the parlance of the time, go further, I didn't think I could say no. I didn't have the voice.
And I will say, even though my abuse wasn't perpetrated at such a young age as yours, I also felt that I didn't recognize that I had agency to say no. And I've recognized that, and it's been identified by many, many survivors, that whether it's because you become paralyzed, you disassociate, or you just don't feel that you are able to do that. And a lot of the work I do with survivors now, those that I work with directly, is also around getting back into your body because of the disassociation piece, getting back into your own body with safety, because sometimes the safest thing is to leave your body so that you don't feel the pain.
I disassociated constantly. That was how I got through. And it's really interesting because one of the gifts of writing this book, even as an adult, when I was mostly healed, I still was, because I'm so intellectually based, I always felt like a body with a head attached. And writing this book, I started doing yoga. And now yoga has taught me how to sit in my body, how the difference between pain and discomfort, and given me a sense of centered body awareness that I never had. And, I don't lie about my age. I'm 67. I was 65 when I started doing yoga, and it really gave me a whole new look, because in many ways, I shut my body off. I didn't like it. It was just something that I had.
Right. Well, firstly, I want to say you look amazing.
Thank you.
And I want to, I'm saying that not only because I want you to hear it, but also because, as you said at the beginning, the message here and the message of my podcast is recovery is possible.
It's possible.
And you not only can recover, but you don't recover to have a boring, painful, unhappy life. You can recover, and if you choose that path, you can do anything if you can get through this.
Yeah, no, I think that's the thing is I thought for a long time that surviving was the same as thriving. I thought I was resilient. I just wrote an article about this. I kept toughing it out and thinking that if I just endured, I was okay. And what I've realized is, survival is fine, but what we want to do as people is we want the ability to thrive, to be able to find new paths, I think it's not like you wake up one day and the sun is perfect. And, you know, when I walked, I was in an inpatient setting at the end of my, you know, when I finally came to terms with this. And I didn't walk out one sunny day and everything was perfect. But, you know, slowly I learned the tools and, you know, now I'm happy. I have, you know what it's like to feel joy.
And it's something that I wish so much for all survivors. And I wish, and sometimes I even say to people, if you can't see the hope for yourself now, then please borrow mine.
Right. Oh, that's a really good thing to
because
say.
I know it's possible, and I can see it for you as much as I can see it for myself. And I think this idea that you can that you can dare to imagine what you might want to become.
Right.
Because I think what I was taught is you can't have anything of your own. You don't deserve anything of your own.
I know that feeling.
Right.
Yeah. I also think because I was abused so frequently that, my intimacy muscle was cut, I like to say. And I was not able to, with men, even with friends. I really had trouble having intimate relationships. As a young woman, I bounced from relationship to relationship because all I wanted is the boogeyman, somebody to sleep next to me to protect me from the boogeyman.
Right.
And
the boogeyman was inside you.
the boogeyman was inside me, and then my life had shown up at the bedroom door. Unfortunately, it was my father too. And I ultimately, with healing, I've been married for 24 years, and I'm able to have a really intimate relationship, not only with my husband, thank God, but also with friends and community. And these are the gifts that we get through recovery. With recovery from trauma, recovery from alcoholism. It's the gifts, but we have, but the first step is letting go of the secret.
When most people talk about intimacy, or when most people think about intimacy, they think about perhaps sex. So what would you define as intimacy?
Gosh, that's a good question. And I think it's being able to be yourself with somebody. It's that love, really caring about someone on a really, of course, it's nice to have sex and loving sex, but it's having that, being able to have friendships with people that you can count on, who can count on you. And the same for my husband, having that deep connection with another human being. The sex thing was an issue for me too as an abuse survivor, but in many ways, not being able to love was a harder part. I didn't love myself. I hated myself.
And I think when there's abuse, and whether abuse is within the family unit or outside of that, as we know, the statistics are so much of the time it's someone you know. And when it becomes someone you know, there's also that kind of conflation of love and safety and sex and, so all those things become very confusing. So what love represents to you, what love represented to me had to change.
Yeah, I think for me too, because and it's going to sound, but I was a little kid. I loved my parents and they didn't protect me, but I loved them. I loved my mother till the day she died, truthfully. And, it does get conflated. And unfortunately, these crimes, especially the crimes against children, but I kind of feel like all sexual assault is in some ways, but crimes against children are, and I say this a lot, crimes of opportunity. And that's why, unfortunately, 90% of those crimes are from people that people know. They're not necessarily the father, thank goodness, but they're people that are close, that the child is willing to trust. I think that the idea of the bad man driving around in the car, well, occasionally that does happen. It's not the most common thing.
Most common, yes. And I think, one of the things that I'm trying to do is help educate people on the level of education, in schools, educate the teachers, have age-appropriate education for every age of student. educate law enforcement in the way that they receive these kinds of complaints, the way that they process these kinds of complaints, help change legislation so that more legal support, or really any legal support, is provided, that the legal support for a victim can match the legal support that might be available to a perpetrator.
Right.
And so I think all of these changes are something that I'm motivated to be a part of as an advocate. And I understand that you are too.
Yeah, that's what came to me. You know, I had the gift of yoga, but the big gift of writing this book. When I wrote this book, I thought, okay, I'm going to write this book. I've been a writer my whole life, on and off. It's my passion. And I thought, I'm going to write this book, and I'll tell my story, and I'll try to get it published. And if it gets published, I'll publish it, and then I'll go on and write other things. But what ended up happening is I started realizing as I wrote it that I could do more. And the writing of this book has created a mission. I call it my third act. And my mission is for whatever time I have left, is to educate people, bring awareness, bring light on this issue, because, and especially incest is so taboo, but any kind of sexual abuse, work to change things for survivors. And I'm sort of dedicating my time to it, all of my free time. And so we're on the same page. And, I think it's really important to start educating children really early about their own bodies and what people touching their bodies, what's okay, what's not okay. I read somewhere recently that even parents, and I never thought about this, telling them, oh, go hug this person, forcing them to hug people. But, we don't want to force intimacy on children. That I don't know why that never hit me till I was doing some reading the other night, and I was like, oh my God, this is so true.
Yeah, I mean, being English and also just a generational difference from the people who, my daughter who's 11 and her age, they seem to have much more agency to stand up for themselves. And obviously through my own education of my child and the way that the schools handle these issues, they have much more agency to say no. When I was a kid, and including with my perpetrators, they were closer to my parents' age. I had no idea. It wasn't socially acceptable to say no just to somebody that much older than you.
Yeah, no. And I would have never, I was terrified. I mean, in a family, if a perpetrator is a father, stepfather, uncle, usually children are threatened. We're told, this is my story is different and similar to a million others, unfortunately. And usually children are threatened. I was told that you must keep it a secret. I was told it was my fault. I actually, because of my mother's blindness, believed that, integrated it. And I was told no one would believe me, and I was terrified, terrified that if I told someone that my father would lock me up, and, on the off chance someone did believe me, I knew it was going to destroy my family.
Right. And I think the guilt around the possibility of telling the truth on an issue like that when you're a child is really overlooked.
Right.
Especially in a family system. I can only imagine, and I have experience, with other people close to me, that just the idea that you would know how much this would disrupt everybody, and even for yourself.
Yeah, at this age even, well, both of my parents are deceased, which makes things easier. And I have a younger sister who was not abused, thank goodness, sexually. In my father's harem, nobody got out unscathed, but I had her consent as I started writing this book, before I even thought about publishing it. She read it. She's read it several times. But, I every once in a while, which, it strikes me, I think about my mother and I think, my father less so, but my mother, I go, oh, people are going to read this and they're going to really think badly of her. My sister actually is the one who calms me down more than anyone, because she said, look, she calls me Ange, and she's like, Ange, she failed you. She failed both of us, but she failed you. So tell your story.
Yeah.
And it's difficult.
Yeah.
It's so messy when it's the family, particularly, but it's messy even,
No matter what.
no matter what.
And that, that desire to protect, I feel like particularly a mother, is so strong in children.
Oh.
And, I feel it myself. Did your sister know that you were being abused?
Not when we were young. I told her when I
She's younger or
before
older?
she's younger than me
Okay.
by 2.5 years.
Right.
So she did not know, but when I told her, at first she did believe me from the beginning, but it took her a little bit to process. But I think with time we've talked about it a lot. And while she wasn't sexually abused by my father, she was sexualized. And my father, when I think back on my father's relationship with any woman, friends, it was always sexual. And so she was sexualized by him in that way. But she was not. I used to check the sheets because her sheets. And I think my mother, I write about this, the fable of Persephone, Demetra, and Hades. And Demetra was the Mother Earth, and Hades stole her daughter, and this is why we have spring and winter. They decided to divide the time with her. But I write, it was as if Demetra, Mother Earth, my mother, had two daughters, and she gave one to Hades in exchange for protecting the other. And in that way, my mother did protect her. I, really did. She, she couldn't protect me. Or wouldn't. It's always hard to say.
She didn't.
The bottom line is she didn't. Yes. The fact is she did not protect me.
Yes.
And it took a long, long time for her to apologize.
And how was that for you when she apologized?
Well, it's the end of the book.
Okay,
It
okay.
is
Well,
actually the
have to read it.
epilogue
Yes.
of the book. So,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
I'll just say, I had been protecting her for so long. I hurt for her when she was telling me. I felt bad because she told me she was a terrible mother. And my first impulse was, and I write about this, is to stop her from talking. But I didn't. So, and yes, it's my tear-jerking end at the book. But I when I read that section of the book, I sometimes, it took me a while. I still cry sometimes when I read it. Because I did love my mother, and families are complicated, and families can fail you, and sometimes love is unconditional. Now, I'll be honest, when my father died, I felt relief, and somebody asked, you didn't ask, but I'll tell you, a podcaster asked me recently what it was like to forgive my father, and I didn't. I haven't forgiven him. I'm not angry, I'm not resentful, but I'll never completely forgive him.
Right. I understand that. I think for me, the way I separate it is there are behaviors that are unforgivable.
That's a good way to say it.
And I'm glad that my perpetrator, my primary perpetrator, is no longer alive, so he can't hurt anyone else, and my other perpetrator is in prison, so she can't hurt anyone else. But it is complicated.
It is.
It's very complicated, I think, with enablers, or especially family members. The best that I can do is say, I believe that often, particularly mothers, will do the best they can with the tools they have. I understand that this disease of predating and also of enabling, and the codependency that goes with that, is something that goes through families generationally. And I've never met a mother who wants this to happen to her child. And so I can have this sort of the feelings around that this did happen, and that there were people who enabled it, but also be able to understand that there is some solace in that. If they had better tools, they would have used them.
Right. And I think with the enablers especially, I think that truthfully, oftentimes in families where a mother is an enabler or a stepmother, or even a sister, people are groomed also by the perpetrator, and they're all so that's part of it. The grooming is also goes across. I watched my father's relationships with women, and he was always grooming them in some way.
Yes.
Now, as for my father, I will tell you, I feel pity for him. I do feel really sad because he never got to be a true father. And I think, imagine living your life and dying with this secret and knowing that you've done this. And
I think that is a miserable way to live and a miserable end. I think the forgiveness thing is a weird one.
Yeah, but my mother I forgave fully.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that's lovely. And because I suppose, with her own apology to you, there was some peace at the end. And for me, it's peace that I'm looking for.
And forgiveness to my mother allowed me to forgive myself on some level. Because even though it's not your fault, I think as survivors, we deep in ourselves sometimes blame ourselves, and we want to live a life where we're not angry at ourselves anymore, and where we don't carry that in our heart.
Absolutely. So having finished the book and now going on to do a book tour, and hopefully everyone will go and get this book. And I'm looking forward. I got a little way through it, and I'm looking forward to finishing it. But such a pretty picture. And what's next after this?
Well, I'm going to really continue doing my advocacy work, and I plan to write a second book. That book, because my book ends when I'm 33, and I had more years of healing. I want to write it about some of the healing's not linear, some of the things I had to go through when in my healing process. I also want to write it about how perhaps the ability to create a second life, a third life at an older age, and something that might inspire other older adults to say, I'm not done yet. I can do more. So that's kind of the next book. The
fourth act.
I don't know. When I told my husband that I was going to start working on another book, he said, "Really? We have to go through this again?"
Goodness. Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, please." But for right now, the book tour and podcasts and a few little TV appearances are taking up my time. It's very interesting to go from a private person your entire life to a very public person, telling people about the worst thing that ever happened to you. It's a very new experience for me.
Yeah, putting that out there has its pitfalls and its benefits, I in my experience. But having gotten to know you a little bit, I can see that if you set your mind to something, you're highly educated, highly academic, highly determined, and also you have a purpose.
It's given me a purpose, and I really believe that as survivors, if you have the wherewithal and the time, and I do, I can really help people. I can help other survivors, and work on looking at legislation as well as supporting some of the rape treatment centers in my area and nationally, because right now it's a time where these centers have lost a lot of funding, and they need as much support as they can get.
Right, that's a really good point. So I just want to say that I'm so grateful for the work that you do. I'm so grateful that our paths crossed.
Me too.
I'm excited to spend more time seeing how we can work together and bring healing to our own souls, but also to as many other people as possible, and build a foundation for that, and invite as many survivors to join this journey. So
I too am looking forward, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much.